7th edition of For the Love of Children is proudly brought to you by Kiddies Dom with the support of Y Crypt, Talk to Self, Body Safety Academy, Augustine Odanibo, Building Boys Academy, OnPad, Salma Private Schools The Safe Hands, FIDA Nigeria Enugu Chapter, Amaje Event Center, Nzapi, Agosil, and Afia TV. Thank you for standing with us in creating safer spaces for children.
Good afternoon, everyone. For this session, let's look at anti-bullying in schools, creating policies, systems, and cultures. We will be exploring how schools can create bully-free environments through developing policies, establishing systems, and building cultures. Why exactly are we having this conversation? We found that policies and systems actually help schools to create a sustainable and accountable operation. Policies and systems also provide a standard that can guide people or members of your school community regarding your operations in schools. In this case, anti-bullying dynamics. We have also found that when children feel safe in school, they tend to do better in their academics. So provide them a bully-free space or a bully-free learning environment, and they will do better in their academics. Before we move ahead, let's talk about policies, systems, and culture, and bear in mind key words while we are going through this presentation. So when we talk about policies, what are we referring to? We are referring to rules and guidelines. We are referring to a written document that clearly defines what is acceptable behavior in your school. When we are talking about anti-bullying policy, we are also talking about outlining how bullying incidents will be handled should that incident occur in your schools. What about systems? Systems speaks to how you will implement the measures you have stated in your policy. Systems speak to reporting mechanisms, investigation protocols, support for the bullied, the bully, and their parents. Systems speak to training programs and monitoring tools. With systems, you should be thinking, can I measure what we are doing about anti-bullying in my school? What about culture? Culture simply talks about your values. What values drive your school? We are talking about values such as tolerance, equality, empathy, kindness, inclusion, respect. That is what culture refers to. Now, let's also bear in mind that with culture, it starts from the top to bottom. You want, as a leader, to model what behaviors or what attitude you want to see in your school. So let's recap. Policies would be the what. What do you want to put in place with regards to creating a bully-free environment in your school? Systems would refer to the how. How are you going to ensure or achieve those measures you have stated in your policy? The culture is the why. What is the reason for wanting a bully-free school in the first place? Now, bear in mind that when we are talking about bullying, we are referring to all types of bullying in this presentation. We are referring to physical bullying, emotional bullying, and verbal bullying. Also keep in mind that when we are referring to bullying, it can be student-student, parent-student, teacher-student, parent-teacher, teacher-teacher. So you have to cover all these possible scenarios when you are thinking about creating a bully-free school. So let's move ahead. How do we create anti-bullying policies in our school? I'm going to quickly share with us 7 simple steps. And believe me, they are quite simple. The first step is to decide what your mission statement for an anti-bullying policy will be. It is basically the purpose of that policy, the reason why you are developing an anti-bullying policy in the first place. So for instance, your mission statement for your anti-bullying policy can read, "For the love of children is committed to providing a safe, supportive, and inclusive environment where all students, staff, and parents feel respected and valued." Did you see what I did there? We have students, staff, and parents, not just students and staff, but all members of your school community. The second step is to decide on what the definition of bullying will be in your school. Define it. What constitutes bullying? And you have to be precise. It doesn't have to be ambiguous. Is it name calling? Is it making fun of a person's tribe or race or religion? Is it hitting another individual? Again, your definition of bullying must cover all types of bullying. The third step is to think about your reporting systems. What do you want to put in place with regard to reporting bullying? When you're thinking about reporting systems, you have to think also on how you can prioritize confidentiality so you can increase the number of reports you would get and get members of your school community to feel free when it comes to reporting bullying incidents. When you're also thinking about reporting systems, you're outlining the different ways bullying can be reported. It can be reported perhaps with a suggestion box. It can be reported via email. It can be reported simply by writing a note. The fourth step is to think about penalties. What would be the consequences for people that have been found bullying another person? You also have to include bystanders. If I'm standing by and experiencing a bullying incident and I do not report, what consequence can you state for me? You also have to avoid bogus statements when you're thinking about penalties. So you do not want in your policy statements like, "Management will determine appropriate punishment for anyone found guilty." What that means is when a bullying incident happens, there is a loophole now for people to introduce compromise. Oh, management will decide. So maybe if you gave 1 week suspension to student A, because management will decide, you could give 2 weeks suspension to student B. You do not want scenarios like that. So avoid bogus statements when you're thinking about penalties. Step 5 is to think about how you're going to resolve bullying incidents, how you're going to provide support to people that have been bullied, the bully themselves and their parents. So what are you thinking about in this step? You're thinking about outlining in very clear terms actions that would be taken if a bullying incident occurs. What kind of support do you want to provide for both the bully and the bullied? Are your parents aware that they have to show up for a meeting if their children are involved either ways, whether they are the victims or they are the perpetrators? When you're thinking about rehabilitation, resolution, and recovery, you're also thinking about how to drive parents to actually show up for these support meetings. And that means you might be pushed to state consequences for parents that do not show up for these meetings. You're also talking about sensitization strategy. That would be your 6th step. How do you want to communicate the plans, the measures you've put in place regarding anti-bullying in your school? Determine how frequent this bullying is going, these strategies are going to happen. Are they going to happen at the beginning of a school term? Are they going to happen at the beginning of a school year? Are they going to happen quarterly? And the final step would then be, when you have put all these measures in place and you have a draft policy, you then have to review this policy. When you are reviewing your policy, you need to think about your students, your staff, and your parents. You want to get their perspectives. Let them look at your draft policy and validate how practical what you have in your policy is. They can provide solutions or comments, and you take these feedbacks and revise your policy. And trust me, you will get a better policy after the review process. Also, you might have an incident happen in your school, a bullying incident, and then you realize, oh, the policy I had in the first place did not cover or is not robust enough when we are talking about anti-bullying in our schools. So when a bullying incident happens, it creates an opportunity for you to also review an anti-bullying policy you have in place. So with these simple 7 steps, you have a policy. Let me run through these steps quickly. 1, mission statement. Your second step, define bullying. Your third step, reporting systems. Your fourth step, state penalties. Your fifth step, think about resolution, recovery, and rehabilitation. Your sixth step, consider sensitization strategy. And the final step is review that policy. And voila, you have an anti-bullying policy ready for your school. When you have the policy prepared, then share with your entire school community. Also bear in mind, as I have repeated over and over again, avoid compromises when you're implementing policies. Now we are done with policies. Let's talk about how to establish anti-bullying systems. When I talk about systems in schools, I have the rule term of thinking, prevention, and response. So systems in schools, prevention, and response. No matter the issue it is you are trying to handle or create a system for. So for these anti-bullying systems, let's start with prevention. What measures can you put in place to prevent bullying in your school? The first is training and education. You have to create extensive workshops for your students, staff, and parents where you are talking to them about how to manage or prevent bullying from occurring, both in your school and extension in the homes of members of your school community. You have to also decide how regularly you want these workshops to hold. You have to think about information and communication. How do you want to disseminate this message? Is it through email? Is it through WhatsApp broadcast? Is it through text message? Is it by writing a note to your parents? Is it through an orientation book? You have to decide. You're also thinking awareness campaigns. So you've created workshops. You've taught your people about what to put in place or how the school is managing and working towards creating a bully-free learning environment. But how do you make it fun for them? How do you remind them in very simple day-to-day, week-to-week terms? It could be by creating awareness campaigns. You want to have visible reminders. You want to have posters. For instance, on the screen, we are seeing different kind of classroom posters where we are saying, be a buddy today, not a bully. Speak out against bullying. This is a bully-free school. You want to have those reminders. placed as strategic points in your schools. When you're talking about prevention and systems, you're also thinking the layout of your school and the infrastructure you have put in place. For bullying, especially, you want to avoid blind spots. The more you have blind spots or spaces that are hidden away from eyes of other people, you're increasing the chances of your students, most especially, finding a place away from supervision where they can easily intimidate others. You're also thinking about CCTVs. And let me use this opportunity to remind school owners in this space that when you have CCTVs, it is not just enough to install them. You also have to ensure that they are manned actively. That way, you are on top of situations as they are happening. Finally, for prevention, when you think of anti-bullying systems, let's think about putting a team in place specifically for anti-bullying. This team is going to constitute a staff, a student, and representatives and parents too. This team, their major role, their core functionality would be help us drive and sustain the anti-bullying measures or systems we have put in place in this school. What a dedicated system will do for you is you're giving them a sense of responsibility. So that means this one is my own. I cannot let it go anyhow. That is why you need an anti-bullying team. We've talked about prevention. What about the response part of systems? In the context of anti-bullying, we're talking about reporting mechanisms. How are bullying incidents going to be reported in your school? Please note that you should encourage teachers, all teachers in your school, to be open to accept any bullying report. They might not be the ones to investigate, they might not be the ones to handle it, but all teachers or all staff in your school should be open to receiving bullying complaints. They should know who they can escalate this report to if they are not the ones to handle it. You should also think about creating an anonymous reporting system. As I had mentioned earlier on, this would increase the chances of bullying incidents being reported. Again, reporting bullying can be done in writing, it can be done verbally. Regardless of the mode of reporting, it should be looked into, it should be investigated, and the findings should be communicated to the people involved in that incident. When we are talking about response systems, we're also talking about support you can provide to a child that has been bullied, the bully, and their parents. Why are we talking about providing support to the bullies? It's possible that a child is acting out because of a situation they are going through at the point in time. So you want to look into the root cause. You want to know why they are engaging in bullying or why they find it easy to intimidate others. So yes, you need to provide support for even the bullies. For the bullied, you want to be sure that they come out from that incident or from that process as much as possible, not scattered by the experience they have just faced. You want to look into finding ways to help them heal, depending on how serious the bullying incident they experienced was. And again, you want to get your teacher, your parents involved. Know what is happening at home. Let them also know what happened in school. And together, you will find a resolution for every bullying incident. When we're also talking about response systems for bullying, we're thinking consequences for bullying. What penalties, what consequences are you putting in place for people that have engaged in bullying? In this case, too, you want to consider bystanders. You do not want a situation where people are encouraged to stand by, see or experience a bullying incident happening, and they do not know to report. So you might want to find consequences, maybe minor, but something to hold bystanders accountable. Again, when you're thinking about penalties and consequences, you should be thinking no compromise. Follow through with every case, every bullying case that has been reported, whether it is minor or major, treat it with the same level of attention. And as I had mentioned before, you need an anti-bullying team. That team is looking at both your prevention and response systems and is helping to keep these systems sustainable and as long as possible. We've talked about systems. Let's move into how to build anti-bullying culture. Remember at the beginning of this presentation, I had mentioned that policies are the what, systems are the how, but culture is speaking to the why. And most especially, culture would transcend from year to year, decade to decade. Culture speaks to the foundation of your school. Culture is speaking to the values, the core values of your school, the attitude of members of communities in your schools and their mindsets. When you're thinking about building anti-bullying culture, you're actually not focusing on bullying, but you're focusing on values that when they thrive, they naturally drive bullying away from your system. So what are these values? You're thinking respect, you're thinking kindness, you're thinking empathy, you're thinking tolerance, you're thinking inclusion. Once you get members of your school community to start acting kind, to be respectful to each other, to imbibe empathy, to tolerate each other, to ensure that everybody is included, regardless of their race, regardless of their socioeconomic background, regardless of their height, regardless of their religion or what they believe in, before you know it, you are naturally stifling a bullying culture in your school. Bullying cannot thrive where these values are actually being practiced. How do you then ensure that you can teach these values or get members of your school communities to imbibe these values? One, you can think about curriculum integration. You can decide to include respect, kindness, all the values you want to talk about in subjects, perhaps social education subjects, where in class there is a strategic and structured learning resources that speaks to these values and can help your students imbibe or learn about these values. You're also thinking about peer programs. What programs can you implement in your school to remind people about your culture, about your core values? It could be having a kindness week. It could be having a week of tolerance. It could be saying, oh, our value theme for this term is inclusion. Our value theme for second term is tolerance. It could also be having students create programs for themselves where they are talking or focusing or getting to teach fellow students about these values. So you want to think about values, you want to think about the kind of culture you want to have and how to get members of your school community to key into this culture. As I had also mentioned in the beginning, when you're talking culture, it has to be from top to bottom. If you're a leader and you want a school that believes in kindness, then you have to be kind yourself. You have to model whatever values it is you're expecting from members of your school community. So we've talked about policies, we've talked about systems, we've talked about culture. You would agree with me that so far, what we've shared is basically for educators and school owners or school leaders. However, we have parents in our midst. So, dear parents, how do you know that a school where your child is attending or a school where you want to enroll your child is actually big on creating bully-free spaces? What should you look out for? One, their values. What are the core values of the school, as I had mentioned? Do they have a policy in place? The policy they have in place, does it also include anti-bullying? During enrollment, what was the orientation process like? Was bullying covered in their orientation program? When you're walking around the schools, are you seeing any posters that can remind students or even teachers of the school's belief about no tolerance to bullying? Do they have adequately trained counselors? You can ask and you can tell by interacting with these counselors. You can also ask how were past bullying incidents handled in this school, and it gives you an idea of how the school views bullying, how they manage bullying, and you can tell if you want to go ahead with this school. That is for parents. So I'm hoping that by covering the parents and the school owners or teachers' perspectives, we can tell how we can contribute to a bully-free space in schools where we are involved in. In conclusion, remember that if you want to create a sustainable and effective bully-free environment in your schools, you must involve students, staff, and parents. Also, be reminded that bullying can occur beyond school premises. So you want to find a system where if a bullying incident occurs between the school and home, the children are still free to report. Whether they are coming back to school to report to you or they are going home to report to their parents, because it has happened at a journey between the school and home, and you're collaborating together, you can find a resolution to a bullying incident, whether it happened within the walls of your school premises. As long as the partakers of that incident are members of your school community, then you should be responsible for finding a proper resolution to that incident. Lady Jennifer has talked a lot about school-parent collaboration, and you want to actually have that in your schools. But as parents, you actually want to work together with your schools. Also remember that children with special needs are more vulnerable. So when you're creating anti-bullying systems, ensure that systems you're putting in place actually take into cognizance the limitations of children with special needs in your schools. Commit to following through on any bullying incident, whether it is minor or major. Follow through, give it the same attention. Ensure that support is provided to the bullied, the bully, and their parents. Prioritize rehabilitation over punishment. Yes, we've talked about consequences. But while we are thinking consequences, ensure that you're prioritizing rehabilitation. How are you supporting, most especially, children that have been found to be bullied, so we can break that bullying cycle? What we have shared here today about systems, policies, and cultures to create bully-free environments or to achieve an anti-bullying school can actually be applied to any social setting. So do you have a daycare, or do you have a club an after-school club, or even in churches. These principles apply. This is a reminder that indeed, and indeed, and indeed, we can achieve bully-free schools. So key in, do or play the role you have, whether you have to play, whether you are a parent or an educator or a school owner or a school leader. And if we can actually curb bullying in our schools, we are going a long way to curbing bullying in our societies. Thank you so much for listening. I am open to your questions and answers. Thank you.